Hi, Dr. Pulsfer here. And while this video is about history, it's also relevant to game design insofar as some games are meant to be models of history. And in order to make a good model, you've got to start out with knowing what the truth is. Well, the subject of this video is people trying to change the Vikings into something they were not. And in particular, the notion that shield maidens were in any way other than very, very rare in Viking history, because they were not. I try to deal with history as it was, not as I wished it to be, but the increasing 21st century tendency is to believe that history was whatever you prefer it to be, disregarding evidence and logic, erasing anything you don't like, treating wishes as more important than the truth. To me, and I was educated as an historian and I have a PhD in history, history is what it was, not what you want it to be. Sometimes it's ugly, but that doesn't make it untrue. We see this tendency in the recent desire of some people to make Vikings something where they were not, such as black-skinned, or to think Viking female warriors were significant in any way. So, I want to rely on evidence, and we have to keep in mind that Vikings did not write down any history or anything else really. They engraved stones and statues with simple phrases, often related to someone who had died. We rely on the writings of the Vikings' enemies and on sagas written in Iceland long after anyone alive had taken part in the events of the sagas. The sagas are stories, not history. We have to remember, as Carl Sagan said, the more we want something to be true, the more skeptical of it we should be. Wishful thinking is not evidence, it's not truth. So, for example, Berserkers were stories, not real in any way. Well, what were Berserkers supposed to be? Men who fought naked and rather crazed. Drug crazed, you could think of it as, although I don't know that they were supposed to use drugs. Well, this, of course, is a recipe for quickly getting dead in a melee world of armor and shield walls. It's just nonsense. It's a story. And many other aspects of the sagas are fictional, not historical. For example, most of our knowledge of Norse gods and religion comes from the sagas, because the Norse wrote next to nothing about it themselves and had no churches. So, shield maidens? No. If they existed at all, they were very, very rare. For the same reasons that there are no female players on teams in the NFL, NBA, NHL, and other major sports, though most such leagues have no rule against female players. Women are not big enough, they're not strong enough, they're not fast or quick enough. If women could compete physically with men, they would be in major sports leagues and in sports like golf, because they'd make immensely more money than in female leagues. Whether you think it's unfair that the female leagues don't offer more money, it is a fact. And so if women could compete in male leagues, they would. You can look at Olympic world records for comparison in comparable events. The men's world records are much better than the women's. So women are out of their league fighting skilled men. And Vikings in general were not elite warriors. They were not any better than a lot of other warriors. They get a reputation for that somehow, but it's not true. When the Vikings fought a pitched battle, they lost as often as they won. They didn't want to fight pitched battles. They were raiders. Yes, if you match a top skill woman with a man without such skills and similar weight, the woman might prevail. You have to keep in mind, combat sports rely heavily on weight classes, boxing, MMA, judo, and so on, because with near equal skill, the bigger person almost always wins. That's reality. Shield maidens would have quickly died hand to hand, much as I and maybe you like Lagertha in the TV show Vikings. It's fiction, not fact. Even though we in Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs, have women be able to do the same things as men, that's fiction. It doesn't make any sense from a point of view of fact. Now, there might have been a few women who used a bow. But even there, stronger bowmen are more dangerous because they can pull a heavier bow. Now, crossbows are somewhat different, and maybe in late Viking times, crossbows were used. They were used at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. More important than all of this, we see nothing like shield maidens in the history of any other culture I can think of. Somebody said, what about those ancient cases where a woman was buried with military weapons? Well, that doesn't mean she used them in battle, if she used them at all. And training with weapons doesn't equal fighting with them to the death. I saw a suggestion recently that steppe barbarians used women soldiers. There is no evidence. You could speculate that maybe when horses were quite small, you needed a small rider, and the woman's small stature let a woman be a horse archer, which is what steppe nomads did. They were horse archers. Finally, remember that Amazons are legend, not fact. There is no fact to Amazons. I know of no witnesses to a woman fighting in any pre-modern setting. It may have happened. There may be even some that I don't know about it, but it's very, 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 very rare. Yes, Artemisia was evidently a naval commander for the Persians, but that doesn't mean she fought. She was commander of 5 ships. That movie 300 Rise of an Empire is crap, historically, just utter crap. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. Now, in modern times, the handgun and rifle are the great equalizers. So the Soviets used women in combat in World War II, but there was no equalizer before that. And we're talking about Vikings, not Soviets. Now, you could also consider, if women fought a significant amount, wouldn't we also see female rulers? Keep in mind, pre-modern rulers were usually expected to fight alongside their armies. Well, there in fact are a few females who actually ruled, perhaps as a regent for a young son, but they're very rare, and they did not fight. There's one empress of China in all of Chinese history that I know of, one queen of England, 1 or 2 queens of Georgia in the Caucasus, one pharaoh and Cleopatra long after the pharaohs, a few czarinas of Russia, such as Catherine the Great. No, women were neither fighters nor rulers. What about Boudicca? In British history, we actually know very little about this aspect of British history, but it seems likely Boudicca, who enters the story as a Roman rape victim, was an energizing symbol, not an actual ruler, certainly not a warrior. Now, this may partly relate to attitudes, but it's partly physiology. Now, the attitudes we can see even as little as 50 years ago. Women were not regarded as physically capable. Women were not allowed to run in marathons. The first woman to run the Boston Marathon in 1967 was not desired by the organizers. She sneaked in. Women were not allowed to box. In high school basketball, after I'd graduated from high school, you had 2 girls who played offense only, 2 who played defense only, and only 2 went both ways because women were regarded as not physically capable. 100 years ago, women were trying to gain the right to vote. Now, if that's all true, what do you imagine in an agrarian society like the Vikings? The attitudes are going to be against women fighting, even if they could. In World War II, the Soviets used women combat pilots and soldiers, but the other major powers did not, even though we had the great equalizer of guns or fighter planes. So why would the Vikings be so different, especially in a world with, remember, no contraception, no control of menstruation, and no formal child care, so that women could not devote themselves to training and fighting? I do not say no woman ever fought in the melee era. That would be nonsense to say that, because there's probably exceptions here and there. I just say it was very, very rare and insignificant. So, get a grip on reality. Thanks for listening.